Joining us now, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. You never know what you're going to hear before you come on, Mr. Treasury Secretary. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Good morning.
Morning, Joe.
We have talked in the past about whether you wear different hats, and you have always said, I wear the Treasury Secretary hat. But can we talk about the meeting yesterday with the European leaders and with President Zelenskyy? We haven't talked to an administration official yet. Is the reporting correct that there will likely be a bilateral meeting and then perhaps one that includes President Trump? Is that where things stand right now?
Well, Joe, let's go all the way back to Friday because I want to set the record straight on what went on in Alaska. Alaska was a show of force by President Trump. He invited President Putin to land that the Russians used to own. He displayed a huge amount of military hardware and then did a flyover. It was kind of like inviting your uncontrollable neighbor to your house and showing him your gun case. So then the President Zelenskyy, we had a very good meeting with him and his team in the Oval for about an hour and a half. And then we met with the European leaders, who was an incredible group to have in the White House, all led by President Trump. And yes, the culmination of that was a call with President Putin. And my strong belief is that there will be a bilateral meeting between President Putin and President Zelenskyy. And that's the only way to end this conflict, is to get the two sides talking.
There's such a large intersection between security and economics. I would think that anything that we arrive at, or that Ukraine arrives at with President Putin, to get him to I don't know, for lack of a better term, to behave or to live up to all of the promises that are made, what type of economic considerations would be involved there, whether it's carrots or sticks? Because we've talked about he's made promises in the past that he hasn't lived up to, and there's a feeling that he's going to have to be induced to live up to whatever pieces is arrived at.
Well, I think the sense is that both sides are ready for this terrible conflict to end. And one of the ways to make President Putin want it to end is on the economic side. The Russian economy has 20% plus inflation. Right now, it is a war economy. I think more than 25% of the GDP is coming from the military buildup. You know, it's a very imbalanced economy. They're the frozen Russian assets. The runoff from those is now being used to finance the war. So, you know, there are a lot of moving pieces here, Joe. And then there's the Russian oil. We have planned to up the tariffs on India. These are secondary tariffs for buying the sanctioned Russian oil.
It was interesting watching just the dynamic with the president and the different leaders from Europe that were there. We had just finished a lot of negotiations on tariffs and trade, and everybody seemed to be getting along. It was a little bit surreal, was it not?
Joe, it was a optimistic, great day. Everybody's looking forward. The tariff discussions behind us, and that was very successful. Well, with Europe, and that's a very successful negotiation that President Trump completed in Scotland a few weeks ago, and now we can look forward to getting this terrible conflict solved.
Treasury Secretary Bessent, just in terms of already being done with those deals, I mean, there's still things that are popping up. The Financial Times had a story this week that pointed to the Digital Services Act and the Europeans really wanting to preserve the Digital Services Act and still be able to go after with that. And those are some of the non-tariff barriers that you all had been trying to negotiate and get rid of. It sounds like that is still there. Do you think this cooperation, this potential cooperation when it comes to Ukraine and Russia will end up affecting some of those economic talks that you've been having and will continue to have, I'm certain, for years to come?
Well, Becky, what you're talking about is the digital services tax, the DST, which is an unfair tax where some, not all, European countries tax our great internet companies. And, you know, it's unfair because it's very specific to our companies. But again, Europe very often has a collective action problem. The tariff negotiations were with the EU. You know, I can name a few. I believe it's Italy, France, Spain have the DST. Germany, Poland, others do not. So that's more at the national level than at the EU level, and the tariff negotiations were at the EU level.
But will the Digital Services Act be something that this administration pursues actively? I guess is question one. And question two, because of this cooperation that you see on areas like defense and national security, will that bleed into any of the conversations that are taking place on the economic side? I mean, I think it's key that you, as the Treasury Secretary, are involved in all of these conversations.
Yeah, look, I think that the DST is very different than security guarantees for Ukraine. Everyone wants this conflict to stop, and we're not going to let the DST stand in between that. But we are pushing back. We're pushing back on countries around the world. And the problem with the European countries doing it is once the European countries do it, then they set a global standard, and countries like India, Turkey, Brazil think it's okay to do it.
Mr. Secretary, we would never have enough time, obviously, and I just heard how much time we have left. So in terms of, there's a letter being sent by some Democratic senators about security concerns with the H-20 chips. There's talk about export taxes de facto with the Nvidia and the AMD 15% or whatever sharing revenue, taking a stake in Intel. For lack of a better term, industrial policy, which is anathema typically to Republicans. Would you put any of these things that we're doing right now under that umbrella of industrial policy, which rarely, according to most people, works out?
Well, I would put Joe, I'd put them under security policy. And look, what we discovered, the only good thing about COVID was it was a beta test for what being cut off on the key industries looks like. So whether it's chips, pharma, steel, several other rare earths, many other industries, we've got to become self-sufficient. And this administration is determined to do that. I think there is a group of us in the administration that if we leave office in January 29 and have not done that, we will have considered that we've failed.
But that doesn't explain the Nvidia and the AMD. I don't know what you'd call that. It almost, some people have referred to it almost as a shakedown. You give us, some revenue sharing, and you can sell these chips that formerly there was some concern about whether China should have access to these advanced chips. And now it seems like if there's money involved, suddenly it's okay.
Well, Joe, again, on the H-20s, I think H-20s are now pretty far down the Nvidia stack. So
it could be much more advanced. Yeah.
It's not a national security risk. And what we would like, and what the industry has made a very strong case for, is for China, for the rest of the world, including the global South, to develop the U.S. standard as the global standard. I remember when Japan led the world in cell phone technology, and it didn't become a global standard. And for a long time, the Japanese technology got very isolated. The last thing we want is a Huawei Belt and Road, where Huawei is selling chips to the rest of the world, and U.S. technology is excluded.
Mr. Secretary, I have a couple of questions. One is there's a new report out. It relates to Nvidia about a new chip they're trying to build called the B30A, which apparently is more sophisticated than the H20, which they want to sell to China. Have they come to you about that chip?
That would be, Andrew, that'd be through Commerce. I haven't seen that yet. I was watching you earlier this morning, so I'm sure we'll be discussing it, and it will require a license to do that.
Right. Well, then weigh in on this, since you did, it sounds like you heard maybe some of the discussion we were having earlier, and it relates to Intel and the potential 10% stake that the U.S. Might take in that company. And what steps you think either the White House or the administration might otherwise take to try to persuade or aggressively sell Intel chips to U.S. companies? Because one of the biggest issues about Intel thus far has been that they're not selling as many chips as they should. And the Biden administration actually tried to put some pressure on big tech companies to buy these chips. And a lot of those companies said, we don't think the chips are good enough.
Yeah, and the last thing we're going to do is put pressure, is take a stake and then try to drum up business. The stake would be a conversion of the grants and maybe increase the investment into Intel to help stabilize the company for chip production here in the U.S. There's no talk of trying to force companies to buy from Intel.
But no concern that, if you prop up a company that deserves not to make it, that it's just another example of almost too big to fail. Is Intel in the past, the government has been great at picking winners and losers. But you think because of the foundry that Intel has, it's that important that the government actually helps to keep that viable?
Joe, there are industries that we have to onshore. I think you and I are the only ones in this conversation old enough to remember the Arab oil embargo in the 70s and gas lines. And I would say that the single point of failure for the global economy is that 99% of the advanced chips in the world are made in Taiwan. And for national security, we have to stop that single point of failure.
Mr. Secretary, have you had any, just changing, once again, like I said, we try to get as much as we can in. Have you interviewed anyone for Jay Powell's replacement in recent days? Can you give us any light on where that stands? And after the PPI numbers we had last week, do you still think that this is the time for a 50 basis point cut or at least 25 at the next meeting?
Well, Joe, a lot of things there, Joe, so let's dissect that.
Okay.
In terms of the interview process, we've announced 11 very strong candidates. I'm going to be meeting with them probably right before, right after Labor Day, and to start bringing down the list to present to President Trump. And it's an incredible group. It's people who are at the Fed now, have been at the Fed and private sector. So I'm looking forward to meeting all of them with a very open mind. And then on PPI, first of all, since President Trump came into office, there were 5 very tame PPI numbers. And a big component of this month's PPI number was investment services, which just means the market went up a lot.
Right, in terms of, since a lot of it is 2 and 20 or whatever, I guess maybe that
well, even just 1%. If the portfolio is up 10%, then it's up.
Right.
Mr. Secretary, you started at the beginning describing President Putin as your uncontrollable neighbor. You kind of brought over and showed your gun case to. I know part of what the administration has done has tried to make it tougher for Russia to be able to sell its oil. It cracked down pretty tough on India, which is importing a lot of Russian oil, but not so much when it comes to China. Is China in the wrong for importing so much Russian oil as well? I think they import just as much as India does.
Oh, well, let's go back and look at the history, though, Becky. And China importing it is suboptimal. But if you go back and look pre-22, pre-invasion, 13% of China's oil was already coming from Russia. Now it's 16, so China has a diversified input of their oil. If you go back and look now, I believe India had less than 1% of their oil, 1%, and now I believe it's up to 42. So
wow.
India is just profiteering, or they are just profiteering. They are reselling. They've made $16 billion in excess profits, some of the richest families in India. So this is a completely different thing. Like this India, what I would call the Indian arbitrage, buying cheap Russian oil, reselling it as product, has just sprung up during the war, which is unacceptable.
Mr. Secretary, just to touch on another topic that I think we have talked about, at least I think maybe we talked about with actually the president, but I'm curious where you land and just how it would be effectuated, this idea of using some of the tariff money to effectively create a dividend for American citizens. A, are you an advocate for that relative to using that money to pay down the debt? And B, if you are, how would it work in practice?
So, Andrew, I think President Trump has talked about that, but he and I haven't, and I think at a point we're going to be able to do it. As you would have seen, U.S. Ratings were affirmed last night because of the tariff income, but President Trump and I are laser focused on paying down the debt. So I've been saying that tariff revenue could be $300 billion this year. I'm going to have to revise that up substantially. So I think that we're going to bring down the deficit to GDP. We'll start paying down debt. And then at a point that can be used as an offset to the American people.
You said you might have to revise. Is it up? How high?
I'm not prepared to give you the number now, but it could be substantial.
I know you have an 8 a.m. I was going to ask you. I can't help myself. I asked you about inflation. We had someone on the other day that looked at the revised employment numbers and said you could almost make the case that there might have been a lull, but it's starting to turn back up. Is that what we want, or does that make it harder for the Fed to cut? What do we? I guess we want full employment with low inflation so that the Fed can cut. I can answer for you, I guess.
Well, that's a good answer, Joe. So I think we could go back to. I think that we could either go back to the 90s where we had good low inflationary growth, or back to President Trump's first term. But I think the real problem here is we're seeing some distributional aspects to the higher rates, as your earlier guest said, especially in housing and in for lower income households with high credit card debt. So we're seeing this big CapEx boom. Part of it's AI, part of it's the tax bill. And so CapEx is doing well, but households, home building is struggling. And you were asking me about interviewing Fed candidates, and there's the ability. Everyone has the ability to look at the current data, but let's just think about if we keep constraining home building, then what kind of inflation does that create 1 or 2 years out? So a cut here could facilitate a boom or a pickup in home building, which will keep prices down 1-2 years down the road.
All right. Once again, I know we went long. Thank you. Apologize to people that schedule these things for you, Mr. Treasury Secretary. Thanks for all your time. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
Okay. A programming note. We were talking about the purview of some things being with Commerce. Well, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is going to be on Squawk on the Street. And Andrew, you can send those guys your question about that more advanced chip.
Yep.
Yeah, and ask the Commerce Secretary.
All right, when we come back.